Hello and welcome back to Heck Knows. I'm your host Heck and I'm the one who knows, and today I know a thing or two about the supernatural. And no, I know what you're thinking, but no, not those pretty demon boys from TV. No, we're here to talk about a group of 20 supernatural movies that have been released during Dumpuary over the last 20 years. And just to remind you, that's kind of what we're doing on this series. We're taking a look at Dumpuary, which is the worst time of the year for movies. It's the Hollywood dumb months of January and February, hence Dumpuary. Now, if you were to look up these supernatural movies on IMDb or whatever you use, you'll often see them categorized as action horror. But I prefer to call them supernatural because these movies are essentially evil fantasy, right? We're talking things like vampires, witches, werewolves, angels, demons, that sort of thing. We're talking about movies like the Underworld series, for example, which, aren't really scary enough to be called full-on horror, and they don't fit in with a conventional action movie because of their angst and bad attitudes. But more on the Underworld series later. My original plan was to have one big supers episode by combining this supernatural genre with the superhero genre, because in a lot of ways they are extremely similar. Both feature some sort of hero in a battle of good versus evil, both are heavy on special effects, and both draw from or are inspired by some sort of lore like comic books or fairy tales, for example. But I scrapped that idea because these movies are fantastic, and I decided to give each super genre its own episode so we can do a bit more of a deep dive and try and understand these movies a little bit better. So this time it's about supernatural. Next episode will be on Dumpuary superheroes. Let's get into it. So typically this would be the part of the show where I hand out the Top Bunk Award for the best movie of the bunch, the one that deserves those top bunk privileges. But this time I'm just not going to do that because the only two decent movies here are Kong Skull Island and Cloverfield, and I kind of only put them in this category because they didn't really fit anywhere else. Kong Skull Island is one of the better, more fun movies about a big old ape, but quite frankly it's not quite top bunk material. And Cloverfield, the one memorable part about that movie was the marketing campaign. The movie itself is actually only okay. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to sanction off the top bunk tonight. No one's getting those top bunk privileges. It's closed. It's shut down. Okay? That's just how it's going to be. Let's move on. Moving on now, we're on to the middle bunk. And when I was putting this list of films together, I wasn't shocked to see one of the Underworld sequels pop up. That's kind of exactly the type of movie you'd expect to see come out in Dumpuary. But what I was surprised to learn is there are actually 5 Underworld movies. Like, who the heck is watching these movies? Who are you? Show yourselves. But even better still, 4 out of the 5 of those Underworld movies have been released during Dumpuary, so naturally, I decided to watch all 5 over the course of a few days. I absolutely would not recommend doing that, but I did it so that I could provide you with my top 5 Underworld movie rankings. Definitive list. Let's take a look. The Underworld movies are a perfect ambassador for the supernatural genre. They're dark figuratively and literally. All of these films just have this pale blue look to them, much like the flesh of Victor's freshly animated corpse. And they feature some of the most iconic members of the genre with vampires and werewolves, or as they call them in the Underworld universe, lycans. The main hero of this franchise is of course Celine, played by Kate Beckinsale, who is either wearing her signature skin-tight suit or nothing at all, and she carries these movies big time. as she finds herself in all sorts of pickles, usually caught somewhere in the fight between vampires, lycans, and eventually humans. Alright, let's jump right into the rankings, and right at number 5 we have the 4th movie in the series, which is Underworld Awakening. Up until this point in the movies, humans weren't really a factor. There was one human who was, but otherwise, humans didn't really play a part. They didn't even know that vampires and lycans even existed, but now in this one they figured it out, good for them, and they're getting their greedy little fingers involved. They even managed to capture Celine, and they have her in a deep freeze comatose state. As the title suggests though, Celine is woken up from her big snooze and she finds out that her lover is dead and she now has a daughter. Celine is still cold as ice though and doesn't really want anything to do with her daughter, even tells her something along the lines of, "Hey look kid, my lover is dead, I just met you, I don't even know who you are, I'm not going to give you a hug or whatever." And that's probably honestly the best part of the movie. The rest is just bad acting, especially from these two, as well as some clunky special effects and a really lazy script. That's my number 5. At number 4, we have Underworld Evolution, which is the sequel to the original. It's number 2 in the series. I remember saying, wow, this is bad multiple times throughout the movie. This one lost a lot of the cool factor that the first one had. One example being that the villain looks more like Ivan Ooze rather than a badass vampire. The plot of this one is also all over the place and becomes somewhat of a lore bore as it gets into the origins of the vampires and lycans by telling us that long ago, the first immortal human had 3 sons. One son, bit by a bat, became the first vampire. Another son, bit by a wolf. You guessed it, turned into the first werewolf lycan. The other son, who knows what happened to him, but I bet you he's glad he didn't get bitten by no bugs. At number 3, we conveniently have the 3rd film in the series, which is actually a prequel, so chronologically it's the first film, but don't worry, that's as complicated as it gets because the entire plot of this movie has already been spoiled in the first 2 movies, so no surprises here. You hardly even notice that Kate Beckinsale is gone because Rana Mitra is basically the same character. This film is pretty bad, but I'm putting it number 3 because Bill Nighy is just having a blast being an evil vampire here. He just kills it in every scene he's in. I mean, just look at this guy go. Coming in at number 2, we have Underworld Blood Wars, which is the 5th and maybe final one, who knows. The vamps and lycans are back to their old tricks and they're scrapping again. This time they're fighting over Celine because I think she has some special blood or something. Honestly, I don't really know. This is the 5th Underworld movie I'd watched in a couple days, and honestly I had kind of checked out mentally at this point, so I had no idea what was going on as far as the plot goes. But with the help of a few beers, I was able to kind of just switch my brain off and just roll with it. The action was kind of entertaining and I was able to just have a sort of decent time, which I think is honestly how you should just watch these movies. Just turn your brain off and just roll with it. Don't think about it too much. But that's my number 2. So, which means number 1, obvious choice. Finally, we have the original Underworld movie. And no question here, I mean, the first one is by far the best and it should have been obvious from the get-go because this is the only one not released in Dumpuary. Kate Beckinsale just oozes the confidence and coolness. Bill Nighy chews up the scenery once again. I mean, he's just awesome. And it also looks like there was some care and planning that went into this one because it features the most practical effects here, which makes it look better than the other films. Even if it is a little clunky, it just makes it a little bit more endearing that they went through the effort. They were definitely going for like a Matrix, but with vampires vibe, and I think this one is the most successful at doing that. So those are my top 5 Underworld picks. Hope you enjoyed that little segment, but let's get back to the bunk. We've got some important work to do with the duds. So here we are now at the bottom bunk, and I've got 6 very, very worthy contenders to compete for the trash crown and the title of the biggest dud. Let's take a look. One of the main problems I have with these supernatural films is that they tend to take themselves so seriously that they can lose any potential fun that the audience could be having with these crazy concepts. I mean, there's a clear example here with the first nominee. It's FRANKENSTEIN, which, I mean, I'm not even sure if this one could have pulled it off, even if it went for like more of a campy, less serious vibe. It was just pretty shockingly bad. But Well, interestingly, it was rumored that they were going to have an Underworld crossover with Celine, and she was going to pop up in a post-credit scene, sort of like an MCU-style cameo. But then, I guess as things progressed, they actually decided, hey, maybe let's not. This movie is pretty bad. And you know your movie's really bad when even the Underworld people won't be friends with you. Our second nominee is Gods of Egypt, and oof, this one is a doozy. I mean, this is one of those movies that makes you go, what the heck am I watching? It's a mess of wacky CGI, it's a big box office flop, and they lost a ton of money because it's just so poorly conceived. I'm not really sure who wants to watch this, but I mean, it's also called Gods of Egypt, and they've got like Gerard Butler and Jamie Lannister playing the two gods of Egypt, and it just doesn't really work. I mean, the big snakes were kind of cool though, let's be honest. Next up, we have Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters, and this is a perfect example of just evil fantasy, straight up, right? This movie is quite gross though, and it just makes you wonder, like, who the heck is this movie for? I think even the teenage boys that I imagine this type of movie is aimed at are gonna have a tough time with this one. Next nominee is Season of the Witch, and look, I'm a big Nicolas Cage fan, but any Cage fan will be the first to admit that he's been in some awful ones. And this is one where he just didn't seem to care, and it's probably because he knows it's a slow and boring movie with no humor, intentional or otherwise, a lore bore if you will, which is the worst kind of dud. Up next, we have a movie directed by Uwe Boll, who you may remember directed one of the dud nominees in my horror episode, Alone in the Dark, which almost took home the Trash Crown. And here he is, again, finding a way to make just an absolute disaster. Blood Rain is the name of the movie. It's a medieval vampire story with an excessive amount of gut slashes, some laughable dialogue and performances, and some pretty great unintentional comedy moments like this training montage, for example. So yeah, this one's bad, but Uwe Boll was not done there. Let me tell you, he immediately got a bigger crew together and made your champion. The Trash Crown goes to In the Name of the King, A Dungeon Siege Tale. This is the biggest dud, hands down, congrats, you did it. Taking bits and pieces from old fantasy tales and obviously inspired heavily by The Lord of the Rings, Mr. Boll made this masterpiece of a dud, which I actually strongly recommend as a drinking movie to watch with a group of friends. This is the first time I'm actually recommending my champion dud because it's just so ridiculous on so many levels. I mean, each actor feels like they're in a completely different film. We got Shaggy from Scooby-Doo, who is still playing Shaggy, but this time evil. We got Ray Liotta losing his goddamn mind playing the main villain, but it's actually fantastic to watch. We got Burt Reynolds who was involved. We got Gimli involved. We got Jason Statham playing a farmer who goes by the name of Farmer, which is just amazing because if you imagine them writing the script and they go, well, hey, what should we call Jason Statham's character? I mean, he plays a farmer, what should we call him? The other guy's probably like, well, I don't know, let's just call him Farmer for now, we'll figure it out later. But they just never figured it out, they just call him Farmer. I mean, even his wife calls him Farmer. What's going on here? It's amazing. Another great thing about Jason Statham here is that you can tell he's the one with the most action movie stunt training experience by far because he moves like a freaking demon in this one. Almost like his character from the last like Fast and Furious movies, or like the transporter is just has brain wiped and his memory gone, and he's dropped into this movie as a farmer. It's insane. He makes everyone else look like they're moving in slow motion in all the fight scenes. I mean, he just cannot be contained in this movie. Fantastically silly, really weird, unoriginal, but still lots of fun, but with a shocking lack of dungeons as well. In the Name of the King, A Dungeon Siege Tale is your biggest dud. I mean, congrats again. You did it. Well, there you have it. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Join me next time as we take a look at the superhero genre, but hey, until then, take care.